You've met this kind of empath before. They don't argue, they don't raise their voice, they don't try to win, they just go quiet. And the moment they do, everything changes. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but you can feel the distance. And if you're that empath, you already know something most people don't. That silence, it's not empty, it's overwhelming. Today, we're diving deep into the psychology of empaths who go quiet when they're hurt, and why their silence is one of the most misunderstood emotional responses in the world. Let's start with what everyone gets wrong about empaths. People think when empaths go quiet, they're being cold. They think it's a choice, a strategy, a way to punish someone. Like silence is something they decided to use in that moment. But empaths don't go silent to control the situation. They go silent because the situation is controlling them. See, when an empath gets hurt, it doesn't come as one clean emotion. It doesn't arrive in a simple, understandable form, like just anger or just sadness. It comes as a flood, a rush of overlapping feelings that hit all at once. Too fast to separate, too heavy to explain immediately. They don't just feel anger, they feel disappointment, confusion, emotional shifts, subtle changes in tone, unspoken meanings, all at the same time. They notice what was said, but also how it was said. They feel the words, but they also feel the energy behind those words. And that's where it becomes overwhelming. Because now it's not just about reacting, it's about understanding. And instead of reacting immediately, they absorb it. They sit with it. They let it move through them instead of throwing it back out. Because that's what empaths do. They don't just experience emotions, they process them deeply. And that kind of processing doesn't happen instantly. It takes time, it takes stillness, it takes silence. So, what looks like distance from the outside is actually intensity on the inside. What looks like disconnection is actually emotional overload being handled quietly. They process before they express. And most people misunderstand that because they've never felt emotions in that way themselves. What happens in an empath's brain? Here's where it gets deeper. Empaths experience something close to emotional overload. Their brain doesn't just register what happened, it tries to understand everything behind it. Not just what did you say, but what did you mean? What were you feeling? What changed in you? And even beyond that, why did that feel different this time? Was there something underneath those words? Did I miss a signal earlier? Their mind starts connecting dots most people don't even notice. Now, imagine trying to answer all of that in real time, while the moment is still happening, while emotions are still rising, while the other person is waiting for a response. You can't. No one can process that level of emotional complexity instantly. So, what happens? The brain does something very specific. It slows everything down. Not because it's weak, but because it's overwhelmed with information. And one of the first things that gets affected is speech. Words become harder to access. Thoughts feel incomplete. Feelings are clear, but explaining them isn't. That's why when someone tells an empath, "Just tell me what's wrong," they freeze. Not because they're hiding something, not because they're being difficult, but because the answer isn't ready yet. It's still forming. Because the truth is, they don't fully know yet. Not in words. They know something feels off. They know something hurt. They know something shifted. But turning that into clear language takes time. Because they're not just reacting to the moment. They're trying to understand it completely. They're still feeling it. Empaths weren't born shutting down, they learned it. At some point, they tried to express their feelings openly. They spoke honestly. They showed what they felt. They trusted someone enough to be real. And it didn't go well. Maybe they were told they were too sensitive, that they were overreacting, that they were making a big deal out of nothing. Maybe their emotions were dismissed, brushed off like they didn't matter. Or worse, they were understood in the moment. But later, those same feelings were used against them, thrown back in arguments, twisted, turned into something they regretted sharing. And experiences like that don't just disappear. They teach you something quietly, repeatedly, so they adapted, not in a dramatic way, but in a gradual, almost invisible shift. They started holding things in, filtering what they say, thinking twice before opening up. Until one day they realized something powerful. It's safer to feel everything than to say everything. Because feeling is private, but speaking makes it vulnerable. So instead of becoming less emotional, they became more controlled, more observant, more careful with their words, more aware of how much they reveal. They didn't stop feeling deeply. They just stopped expressing it freely. And over time, silence became their safest place. A place where they could process without being judged, where they could feel without being corrected, where they could understand without being interrupted. And once silence becomes safety, it's very hard to let it go. Here's what nobody sees. When empaths go quiet, their mind gets louder. What looks like stillness on the outside is actually intense movement on the inside. They replay everything, every word, every tone shift, every pause in the conversation, every subtle change in energy that most people would completely miss. They don't just remember what was said, they remember how it felt. The exact moment something changed. The second the energy shifted. The small detail that didn't sit right. And once that starts, it doesn't stop easily. They ask themselves, did I miss something? Was that intentional? Did they mean it the way it sounded? Am I overthinking or finally seeing clearly? They go back and forth again and again, trying to find clarity, trying to separate assumption from reality, trying to understand whether what they felt was real or imagined. Their silence is not emptiness, it's analysis. Deep, constant, exhausting analysis. The kind that doesn't switch off just because the moment is past, while others move on quickly, laugh it off, ignore it, or forget it. Empaths stay with it. They sit in it. They turn it over from every angle. Not because they want to suffer, but because they want to understand. Because for them, clarity matters more than speed. Truth matters more than reaction. So, they stay quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because too much is happening all at once, and they won't leave it until it makes sense. Here's what nobody sees. When empaths go quiet, their mind gets louder. What looks like stillness on the outside is actually intense movement on the inside. They replay everything. Every word, every tone shift, every pause in the conversation, every subtle change in energy that most people would completely miss. They don't just remember what was said, they remember how it felt, the exact moment something changed. The second the energy shifted, the small detail that didn't sit right. And once that starts, it doesn't stop easily. They ask themselves, did I miss something? Was that intentional? Did they mean it the way it sounded? Am I overthinking or finally seeing clearly? They go back and forth again and again, trying to find clarity, to separate assumption from reality, trying to understand whether what they felt was real or imagined. Their silence is not emptiness, it's analysis. Deep, constant, exhausting analysis. The kind that doesn't switch off just because the moment has passed. While others move on quickly, laugh it off, ignore it, or forget it, empaths stay with it. They sit in it. They turn it over from every angle. Not because they want to suffer, but because they want to understand. Because, for them, clarity matters more than speed. truth matters more than reaction. So they stay quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because too much is happening all at once. And they won't leave it until it makes sense. Now, here's the part most people don't expect. Empaths don't go quiet just to protect themselves. They also do it to protect you. Because when an empath is hurt, they see everything clearly. Too clearly. Not just the surface level issue, but the patterns behind it. The tone you used, the intention underneath your words, the things you didn't say but still felt. And in that moment, their awareness sharpens. Almost like everything slows down, and they can see the situation for exactly what it is. And if they spoke in that moment, they wouldn't hold back. Not out of anger, but out of truth. Raw, unfiltered truth. The kind that isn't softened yet. The kind that hasn't been processed or refined. And that truth, it can cut deep. Not because they want to hurt you, but because accuracy in its raw form can be uncomfortable. It can expose things. It can reveal patterns. It can say things that are very hard to hear. So, instead of saying something they can't take back, they pause. They step away from the moment. They let the intensity settle before they respond. They wait. They regulate. They give themselves time to turn raw emotion into something thoughtful and controlled. Not because they don't care, but because they care enough not to destroy something in a moment of pain. Because they understand something most people don't. Words said in emotional intensity don't just disappear, they stay. So, their silence, it's not avoidance. It's restraint. It's emotional responsibility. And in many ways, it's one of the most protective things they can do for both you and the relationship. Here's the problem. Most people don't understand empath's silence. They interpret it as rejection. They assume that if you're not speaking, you must be pulling away. So, in their mind, your quiet becomes a message. You're shutting me out. You don't care. You're being distant. And because that interpretation feels real to them, they react to it. They push harder. They ask more questions. They demand clarity right now. They chase a reaction, any reaction, because silence makes them uncomfortable. But here's what they don't realize. That pressure, it backfires. Completely. Because empaths don't open up under pressure. They don't speed up their process just because someone else is uncomfortable. Instead, they shut down deeper. Not out of stubbornness, not to punish anyone, but to protect themselves from being misunderstood. Again, because to an empath, being rushed while they're still processing feels exactly like being dismissed. Like their internal experience doesn't matter, like their timing is wrong. And that feeling, it's familiar. It reminds them of every moment where their emotions weren't given space. So, instead of opening up, they retreat further inward. They become quieter, more distant, more guarded. Not because they don't care about the person in front of them, but because they no longer feel safe expressing what's happening inside them. And the irony is, the more someone pushes an empath to speak, the less likely they are to be heard. Because what empaths need in that moment isn't pressure, it's understanding. And without that, silence only gets deeper. What empaths need is simple, but rare. They need space without feeling abandoned. Not distance that feels like disconnection, but space that still feels safe. The kind of space where they know you're still there, just not forcing them to speak before they're ready. They need patience without being rushed. Not silence filled with tension, but silence that feels understood. Because for an empath, timing matters. If they speak too early, it won't be clear, it won't be accurate, it won't truly reflect what they feel. So, they wait. Not to avoid the conversation, but to make sure when it happens, it actually means something. They need someone who understands that silence is not the absence of emotion. It's the processing of it. It's everything happening beneath the surface before it turns into words. And when empaths feel safe like that, something changes. They soften. They don't feel the need to disappear as deeply. They don't stay silent as long. Because now, their silence isn't being judged. It isn't being rushed. It isn't being misunderstood. And that safety, it removes the need for protection. Because at the core of it, that's what their silence was doing all along, protecting them. But when they no longer feel like they have to protect themselves from you, they start opening up sooner, more honestly, more naturally, not because they were forced to, but because they finally feel like they can. And for an empath, that kind of safety changes everything. So, if you're an empath who goes quiet when hurt, understand this clearly. You're not cold, you're not distant, and you're not broken. What you are is someone who feels deeply, deeper than most people around you will ever fully realize. You don't just react to emotions, you experience them, you analyze them, you understand them before you let them out. You process carefully. You don't rush your feelings just to make someone else comfortable. You don't speak just to fill the silence. And because of that, you speak only when it's real, only when it's accurate, only when it reflects what you truly feel, not just what you felt in the heat of the moment. Your silence isn't weakness, it's discipline, the ability to hold back when it would be easier to react. It's awareness, the ability to recognize that not every feeling needs to be expressed immediately. And more than anything, it's emotional depth most people will never fully understand. Because in a world where people react quickly, you choose to respond intentionally. And that takes strength. So when you finally speak, it's not noise. It's not scattered emotions or half-formed thoughts. It's truth, clear, considered, meaningful truth. And that's rare. That's powerful. And the right people, they won't fear your silence. They won't rush it. They won't take it personally. They'll respect it. Because they'll understand something others don't. That your silence was never distance. It was depth. And once they understand that, they won't try to break your silence. They'll learn how to be present within it. If this made you feel understood in a way nothing else has, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning.